Elena Novak shelved the last stack of returned books and glanced at the clock on the library wall. Almost 5. Time to head home and start dinner before Pavel returned from his evening class at the community college. She loved these quiet Tuesday afternoons at the small-town library, the peaceful rhythm of organizing books and helping the occasional visitor find what they needed. "Heading out, Elena?" asked Mrs. Winters, the head librarian, peering over her reading glasses. "Yes, just finished the returns," Elena replied, untying her cardigan from around her waist and slipping it on. Though it was April, the spring evening still carried a chill in this part of the country. "Give my best to Pavel. Tell him we're still waiting for his recommendation on those music biographies for the new display." Elena nodded with a smile. Her husband's opinions on music books were valued throughout Millfield, their small town of just under 10,000 people. As an associate professor of music theory at the local community college, Pavel Novak was something of a local celebrity, at least in the town's modest cultural circles. The walk home took Elena past the bakery, already closed, the hardware store, where old Mr. Fletcher was locking up, and the elementary school, where children's artwork decorated the windows. She waved to familiar faces along the way. After 8 years in Millfield, she knew most people, at least by sight. Their house sat on Maple Avenue, a modest 2-story with a small front porch and blue shutters that Pavel had repainted last summer. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, and Elena loved it fiercely. As she turned up the walkway, she could see through the front window that the house was still dark. Good. She had time to herself before Pavel came home. Inside, Elena set her bag on the kitchen counter and went through her usual routine. Preheat the oven, wash her hands, pull ingredients from the refrigerator for dinner. But instead of starting to cook right away, she paused, listening to the quiet of the empty house. Then, almost furtively, she dried her hands and walked to the living room. The upright piano against the wall had belonged to Pavel's mother. When she passed away 5 years ago, they'd moved it from Boston to their home in Millfield. It wasn't a remarkable instrument. The finish was worn in places, and 2 keys in the upper register stuck occasionally, but it had a warm, rich tone that even expensive new pianos sometimes lacked. Elena sat on the bench and lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys beneath. For a moment, she just looked at them, running her fingertips lightly across their surface without pressing down. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to play. The melody started simply, a piece by Debussy that she'd been teaching herself over the past few weeks. As her confidence grew, her fingers moved more surely across the keys, bringing the dreamy, impressionist music to life in the quiet house. Anyone watching would have been surprised by the confidence and sensitivity in her playing, especially given that Elena Novak had never taken a formal piano lesson in her life. Music had always been part of Elena's world, but never in a way that put her at its center. Growing up in a working-class family, piano lessons hadn't been an option. Her parents supported her interest by taking her to free concerts in the park and checking out music books from the library. But formal training remained an unaffordable luxury. Then she'd met Pavel during her final year of college, where she studied library science while he completed his master's in music education. Their romance had blossomed over conversations about books and music in the university cafe. Pavel would talk passionately about Bach and Chopin, while Elena listened, absorbing everything. After they married and settled in Millfield, Pavel's piano became a permanent fixture in their home. He practiced regularly, preparing for the community concerts he occasionally gave or working out pieces for his students. Elena would listen, fascinated by the way he could transform printed notes on a page into flowing sound. One day, when Pavel was at a faculty meeting, curiosity had gotten the better of her. She'd sat at the piano and tentatively picked out a simple melody she'd heard him practice often. To her surprise, her fingers seemed to know where to go, as if the music had been quietly waiting inside her all along. That had been the beginning. For the past 6 years, Elena had been teaching herself to play during the hours Pavel was at work. She learned by ear, by watching Pavel, and by studying his music books when he wasn't using them. Something about the piano called to her in a way nothing else ever had. But she kept her playing private, a secret joy. It wasn't that she thought Pavel would disapprove. On the contrary, he'd probably be thrilled and encouraging. But Elena protected her playing precisely because it was hers alone. something she did purely for herself, without expectation or judgment. The moment she played for others, she feared, the magic might disappear under the weight of their opinions. Now, as Debussy's Clair de Lune flowed from her fingers, Elena closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. She had played this piece dozens of times, but it never felt routine. Each time she discovered something new in the familiar notes, a different emphasis, a slight change in tempo that altered the character of a passage. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the front door open, didn't realize Pavel had come home early, until he was standing in the doorway of the living room, watching her with an expression of wonder on his face. Elena's hands froze on the keys, the final chord hanging in the air between them. "Don't stop," Pavel said softly. "Please." Heat rushed to Elena's cheeks. I didn't hear you come in." Pavel set his briefcase down and came to sit beside her on the bench. At 42, his dark hair was just beginning to silver at the temples, and fine lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, as he was smiling now. "That was beautiful. Elena, when did you learn Clair de Lune?" She shrugged, embarrassed. "I've been working on it for a while, when you're not home." Pavel shook his head in amazement. "You've been holding out on me. I knew you played a little, but this..." He gestured to the piano. This wasn't a little, this was lovely. It wasn't the first time Pavel had caught her playing. Over the years, he'd occasionally come home unexpectedly or forgotten something, and returned to find her at the piano. Each time, Elena would stop immediately, flustered and shy about her self-taught skills. And each time, Pavel would praise her natural ability and urge her to play more openly, perhaps even take some formal lessons to develop her obvious talent. "It's just something I do for fun," Elena said, as she always did. "Nothing serious." Pavel studied her face. "Most of my students would give anything to play with the feeling you just showed. You have a real gift, Elena." She smiled and stood up, gently closing the fallboard over the keys. "I have a gift for making lasagna, too, and that's what I should be doing right now instead of playing around." "How come you're home early?" Pavel allowed the change of subject, though his eyes lingered thoughtfully on the piano. Dr. Chen canceled the department meeting. Budget discussions postponed again. As they moved to the kitchen together, Pavel talked about his day, a promising student who'd finally mastered a difficult piece, a funny mishap during his music appreciation class when the audio system malfunctioned and played everything at half speed. Elena listened and laughed at all the right moments, but part of her mind remained with the piano, with the unfinished music still echoing in her thoughts. Later that night, after dinner had been eaten and dishes washed, Pavel graded papers at the dining table while Elena curled up on the couch with a book. The comfortable silence between them was one of her favorite things about their marriage, the ability to be together without needing to fill every moment with talk. Pavel looked up from his work, pen tapping thoughtfully against his chin. "I got an interesting email today," he said. "From Grantham Conservatory." Elena marked her place in her book. "Grantham? Isn't that where you did your undergraduate degree?" He nodded. "They're planning a big anniversary celebration this fall. 50 years since the modern conservatory was established. They're inviting back distinguished alumni for a special concert series." "That's wonderful," Elena said warmly. "You must be honored to be included." Pavel's expression was a mix of pride and nostalgia. "I never thought they'd remember me. It's been almost 20 years since I graduated." "Of course they remember you," Elena said. "You were on scholarship there. You performed with the symphony your junior year. Why wouldn't they include you?" Pavel shrugged modestly, but she could see the pleasure in his eyes. "They're asking me to perform something. Solo piano for the alumni showcase. What will you play?" "I'm thinking Rachmaninoff. Piano Concerto No. 2. Just the first movement, obviously, since there won't be an orchestra." Elena knew this piece well. It was one of Pavel's favorites, one he'd played recordings of many times in their home. "Challenging, emotional, technically demanding. That's perfect for you," she said. "When is the event?" "October. About 6 months from now." Pavel hesitated, then added casually, "You could perform something too. Not at the main event, but they're having some informal recitals throughout the weekend. Community members, family of alumni?" Elena shook her head immediately. "No, absolutely not. Why not?" "You play beautifully. I play for myself, Pavel, in private. There's a world of difference between that and performing for a room full of music." Professors and professional musicians, Pavel set down his pen. I'm not trying to pressure you. I just think it's a shame that you have this talent and no one ever gets to appreciate it but me. And that's exactly how I like it, Elena said firmly, reopening her book to signal the end of the discussion. Pavel returned to his grading, but not before saying quietly, "Sometimes I think you're afraid of how good you could be. If you let yourself." Elena kept her eyes on her book, though the words blurred before her. Maybe Pavel was right. Maybe there was a part of her that was afraid, not of failure, but of the responsibility that came with sharing a gift. Once acknowledged, talents had a way of making demands on your life, of pushing you into the spotlight when all you wanted was to remain in the comfortable shadows. Later, after Pavel had gone to bed, Elena crept back downstairs. In the darkness of the living room, lit only by moonlight through the windows, she returned to the piano. This time she played with the soft pedal down, her fingers barely whispering over the keys, playing not Debussy but Rachmaninoff, the very piece Pavel would be preparing for the next 6 months. She had never tried to play it before, but she'd heard it so many times that the melody lived in her memory, in her hands. It was far from perfect. She simplified the most technically challenging passages, missed notes here and there, but the heart of the music was present in her playing, the emotional core that no amount of technical precision could create on its own. What would it be like, she wondered, to play this piece for others, to take the music that lived so vividly inside her and set it free in the world? The thought both terrified and thrilled her. But then she closed the piano as she always did and returned to bed, leaving the question unanswered in the moonlit quiet of the house. As summer turned to fall, Pavel's excitement about the Grantham Conservatory anniversary celebration grew. Every evening after dinner, he would practice for hours, working through difficult passages of the Rachmaninoff piece until his fingers moved seamlessly across the keys. Elena listened from the kitchen or the living room couch, occasionally offering him tea or simply sitting quietly nearby, enjoying his playing. "You've really mastered that middle section," she told him one evening in early October. Just 2 weeks before the event, Pavel stretched his fingers and smiled tiredly. Almost. Still not happy with the transition into the final theme, he glanced at the clock. "It's getting late. I should let you sleep." "I don't mind," Elena said truthfully. She loved watching him play, loved the intensity and focus he brought to the music. In those moments, Pavel seemed to transform from her good-natured, sometimes absent-minded husband into someone else entirely, someone commanding and passionate. "Well, I need to rest these hands anyway," he said, flexing his fingers. "Dr. Roth called today. He's finalized the schedule for the weekend." Dr. Thomas Roth was the director of the Conservatory and an old friend of Pavel's from his student days. He had been particularly insistent that Pavel participate in the anniversary events. "When do you perform?" Elena asked. "Saturday evening, main concert hall. 7 o'clock. Pavel's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "The acoustics in that room are incredible, Elena. Wait until you hear it." Elena smiled, touched by his enthusiasm. Though Pavel loved teaching at the community college, she knew he sometimes missed the more rarefied atmosphere of a dedicated conservatory. This event meant more to him than he was willing to admit. "I can't wait," she said, and meant it. The next morning, Elena had just finished her shift at the library when her phone rang. Pavel's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," she answered, pushing through the library doors into the crisp October afternoon. "I'm just heading to the grocery store. Do we need anything besides what's on the list?" There was a pause, then Pavel's voice came through, tight with pain. "Helena, I need you to come to the urgent care center on Pine Street." Her heart dropped. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I had an accident in the wood shop," he said, his voice strained. "Caught my hand in the table saw. It's not good." 20 minutes later, Elena rushed into the urgent care waiting room. Pavel sat in a corner chair, his right hand heavily bandaged, his face pale. "The doctor says I need to see a specialist," he said before she could speak. "The cut is deep, damaged some tendons. I'm going to need surgery." Elena sat beside him, her heart breaking at the devastation in his eyes. They both knew what this meant. There would be no performance at Grantham. The next few days passed in a blur of doctor appointments and phone calls. The specialist confirmed what they already knew. Pavel would need surgery and weeks of recovery and physical therapy. His right hand, his dominant playing hand, wouldn't be back to normal for months. You should still go to the celebration, Elena told him as they drove home from the surgeon's office. Even if you can't perform. Pavel stared out the passenger window, his injured hand cradled in his lap. What's the point? Everyone will just feel sorry for me. Poor Pavel, such bad timing. These are your friends, your former professors. They'll want to see you regardless. He didn't answer, and Elena didn't push. She understood that for Pavel, returning to Grantham unable to play would be worse than not going at all. That evening, as Pavel napped upstairs, exhausted from pain medication, the doorbell rang. Elena opened the front door to find an imposing figure on their porch, a tall, silver-haired man with bushy eyebrows and penetrating blue eyes. Mrs. Novak? He asked in a deep, cultured voice. I'm Thomas Roth from Grantham Conservatory. I hope I'm not intruding. Elena recognized the name immediately. Dr. Roth, please come in. Pavel's resting, but I can wake him. No need to disturb him, Dr. Roth said, stepping into their front hall. I heard about the accident. Terrible timing. How is he doing? As well as can be expected, Elena said, leading him to the living room. Physically, he'll recover completely, emotionally. He's devastated about missing the performance. Dr. Roth nodded gravely, taking a seat on their couch. That's actually why I'm here. I was hoping to convince him to attend anyway. His presence would mean a great deal to many people at the conservatory. I've suggested the same thing, Elena said, but he's resistant. I think it would be too painful for him to be there and not be able to play. Understandable, Dr. Roth sighed. Pavel was always exceptionally talented, one of our most promising graduates. Elena smiled sadly. He's been practicing for months. The Rachmaninoff piece was really coming together beautifully. Before Dr. Roth could respond, they heard a soft sound from upstairs, the creak of the bedroom door opening, followed by Pavel's uneven footsteps on the stairs. Elena? He called. Who was at the door? It's Thomas Roth, she called back. Come down if you're feeling up to it. Pavel appeared in the living room doorway, looking rumpled and tired, his bandaged hand held protectively against his chest. His face brightened slightly at the sight of his old mentor. Thomas. This is unexpected. The two men shook hands, left hands awkwardly, and Pavel joined them, sitting heavily in his favorite armchair. I was just telling your wife how sorry I am about your accident, Dr. Roth said. A terrible stroke of bad luck. Pavel's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. The surgeon says I'll play again eventually, just not next weekend. We'll miss your performance, Dr. Roth said sincerely. But I hope you'll still attend. Many people are looking forward to seeing you. Pavel looked away, his expression pained. I'll think about it. Dr. Roth seemed about to press the issue when he was distracted by something across the room. Is that a Heinzmann? He asked, nodding toward the upright piano. It was my mother's, Pavel said. Not particularly valuable, but it has sentimental worth. May I? Dr. Roth asked, already rising from his seat. Pavel waved his good hand in permission, and the older man crossed to the piano. He lifted the fallboard and played a quick scale, nodding appreciatively. Lovely tone. These older instruments often have a warmth the newer ones lack. He played a few more notes, then closed the piano. Do you play, Mrs. Novak? The question caught Elena off guard. I dabble a bit, she said, feeling her cheeks warm. Nothing serious, Pavel gave a short laugh. She's being modest. Elena plays quite beautifully, though she won't let anyone hear her. Dr. Roth looked intrigued. Is that so? Pavel exaggerates, Elena said quickly. I've never had lessons. I just play for my own enjoyment. The best reason to play, Dr. Roth said with a smile. Then turning back to Pavel, I should let you rest. But please consider coming to the celebration. We could arrange a different role for you. Perhaps introduce some of the performers. Say a few words about your time at Grantham. Pavel nodded non-committally. After Dr. Roth left, he turned to Elena with a sigh. I suppose I should go. It would be childish to stay away just because I can't perform. I think that's wise, Elena said, relieved. It will be good for you to reconnect with everyone. The next morning, Elena had the house to herself. Pavel had gone to the college for a department meeting. Insisted on going, really, despite her concerns about him driving with his injury. The doctors had assured them it was fine as long as he was careful, and Pavel was determined not to fall behind in his teaching responsibilities. Elena moved around the kitchen, cleaning up breakfast dishes and planning dinner. It was her day off from the library, and she had a long list of household chores to tackle. But as she worked, She found herself glancing repeatedly toward the living room, toward the piano. Finally, she dried her hands and walked to the instrument. She hadn't played since Pavel's accident. It had seemed somehow insensitive when he couldn't. But now, alone in the quiet house, she felt drawn to the keys. She sat at the bench and began to play the piece Pavel had been practicing for so many months. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. She had heard it so often that her fingers found the notes almost without conscious thought. It wasn't perfect. She simplified some of the more complex passages, and her tempo was more intuitive than precise. But the emotional core of the music flowed through her playing. Elena lost herself in the piece, eyes closed, feeling the rise and fall of the melodic line, the way the harmonies created tension and release. She didn't hear the front door open, didn't notice Dr. Roth standing in the living room doorway, his coat still on, an envelope in his hand. When she finished playing, the final chord still resonating in the room, a voice behind her said, "Remarkable." Elena whirled around, nearly falling off the piano bench in shock. Dr. Roth stood watching her, an expression of astonishment on his face. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly. The door was unlocked. "I came to drop off some information for Pavel about next weekend, and I heard the music." He shook his head in wonder. "Mrs. Novak, that was extraordinary." Elena's face burned with embarrassment. "You startled me. I didn't hear you come in." "Forgive the intrusion," he said, stepping further into the room. "But I must ask, was that the Rachmaninoff that Pavel was planning to perform?" Elena nodded, mortified. "I've heard him practice it so often. I was just playing around with it." "Playing around?" Dr. Roth repeated incredulously. "Mrs. Novak, what you are doing goes far beyond playing around. You said you've never had formal training?" "No," Elena admitted. "I taught myself mostly by watching Pavel and listening to recordings." Dr. Roth was silent for a moment, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. Then he said something that would change everything. "Mrs. Novak, Elena, would you consider performing at our anniversary celebration? In Pavel's place?" Elena stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? The Rachmaninoff? At Grantham? Next Saturday evening. That's impossible," Elena stammered. "I can't perform. Not in front of people. Especially not at a conservatory in front of professional musicians." "Why not?" Dr. Roth challenged. "What I just heard was music of the highest caliber, not technically flawless perhaps, but played with a depth of feeling that many trained musicians never achieve." Elena shook her head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. I've never performed in public. I wouldn't know the first thing about it." "The first thing is to sit at the piano and play," Dr. Roth said simply, "which you clearly know how to do." "Dr. Roth, I appreciate the compliment, but this is crazy. I'm a librarian, not a pianist. Based on what I just heard, you're both." He sat on the couch, his expression earnest. "Elena, do you know how rare it is to hear someone play with that kind of natural musicality? Technical skills can be taught, but the ability to communicate emotion through music, that's a gift. Pavel is the gifted one in this family," Elena insisted. "He's the one who should be performing." "Pavel can't perform," Dr. Roth said gently. "But you can. And based on what I just heard, you would do his preparation justice." Elena felt trapped, cornered. I need to think about this. And talk to Pavel." Dr. Roth nodded, setting the envelope on the coffee table. "Of course. My contact information is in there. Call me when you've decided." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Elena, I've been teaching music for 40 years. I don't say this lightly, you have a rare talent. It would be a privilege to have you play at our celebration." After he left, Elena sat motionless at the piano, her hands trembling slightly. The very idea of performing in public, at Grantham Conservatory of all places, was terrifying. Yet underneath the fear was something else, something she barely dared acknowledge, a tiny flicker of excitement, of possibility. What would Pavel say? Would he be supportive, or would he see it as an intrusion into his world? And more importantly, could she actually do it? Could she? Elena Novak, the quiet librarian who had never played for anyone but herself, perform one of the most challenging piano pieces ever written, in front of an audience of musical experts? The question swirled in her mind as she sat in the silent house, waiting for Pavel to come home, waiting to tell him about the unexpected invitation that might change everything. When Pavel came home that evening, Elena was still sitting at the piano, though she wasn't playing. Her hands rested motionless on the keys as her mind churned with Dr. Roth's unexpected proposal. "Elena," Pavel called, struggling to hang up his coat one-handed. "Could you give me a hand with this?" She hurried to help him, taking his coat and briefcase. "How was the meeting? You didn't strain yourself, did you?" Pavel sank into a kitchen chair with a tired sigh. "I'm fine. Just frustrated by how much longer everything takes." He held up his bandaged right hand. "Try grading papers with your non-dominant hand sometime." Elena busied herself making tea, her back to him as she gathered her courage. "Dr. Roth stopped by again today." "Oh? What did he want?" "He brought some information about next weekend." Elena set a mug of tea in front of Pavel. "And he heard me playing." Pavel looked up sharply. "Playing what?" Elena took a deep breath. "The Rachmaninoff." For a moment, Pavel just stared at her. Then understanding dawned in his eyes. "You were playing my piece? The one I've been practicing for months?" She nodded, unable to read his expression. "I've heard you play it so many times, some of it just stuck in my head. I don't know, working through it. And Thomas heard you? He came in while I was playing. I didn't know he was there until I finished." Pavel set down his mug. "What did he say?" Elena hesitated, then plunged ahead. "He asked if I would consider performing it at the celebration." "In your place?" Pavel's eyebrows shot up. "He what?" "I know it's crazy," Elena said quickly. "I told him I couldn't possibly." "Did you play it like I just heard you play Debussy last month?" Pavel interrupted. "With that same feeling?" Elena blinked, thrown by the question. I suppose so. I mean, I simplified some of the harder parts, but then it's not crazy at all," Pavel said, his voice strangely intense. "Elena, do you have any idea how good you are?" "I'm not good," she protested. "I just play by ear. I don't have proper technique or training." "And yet Thomas Roth, the director of one of the most prestigious conservatories in the country, asked you to perform." Pavel leaned forward. "That should tell you something." Elena stared at her husband, baffled by his reaction. "You're not upset?" "Why would I be upset?" "Because it's your piece, your celebration, your world." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I thought you might feel like I was intruding." Pavel's expression softened. "Elena, music isn't something you can intrude on. It belongs to everyone who loves it." He reached across the table with his good hand covering hers. "And you love it whether you admit it or not. But performing at Grantham? In front of all those people?" Elena shook her head. "I can't do that, Pavel. I've never played for anyone but you." "And Thomas, apparently," Pavel said with a small smile. "What did he think?" Elena hesitated. "He said I had a rare talent, that I played with feeling." "He's right." Pavel squeezed her hand. "Will you at least consider it?" "For me?" She looked at him in surprise. "You want me to do this?" "I want you to consider it," he said carefully. "This could be an amazing opportunity, Elena. And selfishly, I'd rather have you play my piece than have no one from our family perform at all." Elena felt trapped between Pavel's unexpected encouragement and her own terror at the thought of performing. "I need time to think about it." "Of course," Pavel said. "But don't wait too long. The celebration is next weekend." That night, Elena barely slept. She kept imagining herself on stage at Grantham, hundreds of critical eyes watching her, judging her inadequate technique, her lack of formal training. By morning, she had made up her mind. She would call Dr. Roth and politely decline. But before she could make the call, the doorbell rang. Elena opened the front door to find not just Dr. Roth, but 3 other people: an elderly woman with a silver bun and elegant posture, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses, and a younger woman with curly red hair. "Good morning, Elena," Dr. Roth said cheerfully. "I hope we're not too early. May we come in?" Bewildered, Elena stepped aside. "Of course, but I wasn't expecting." "Allow me to introduce my colleagues," Dr. Roth continued, ushering the group into the living room. "This is Madame Beaumont, our Professor Emerita of Piano, Dr. Lin, our current piano department chair, and Professor Winters, who specializes in Romantic-era composers, particularly Rachmaninoff." Elena shook hands automatically, her mind racing. "It's nice to meet you all, but I don't understand." "I took the liberty of telling my colleagues about your remarkable playing," Dr. Roth said. "They were naturally skeptical given your lack of formal training, but they agreed to come here for themselves before making a final decision about the performance slot. Elena stared at him in dismay. Dr. Roth, I haven't agreed to perform. No, but you haven't refused either, he pointed out. And time is of the essence. The program goes to print tomorrow. What's going on? Pavel appeared in the doorway, looking rumpled. In his bathrobe, his injured hand held against his chest. Dr. Roth beamed at him. Pavel, excellent. We were just about to ask your wife to play for us. Pavel's eyes widened as he took in the assembled group. Thomas, you brought the entire piano faculty to my living room at 9 in the morning. Not the entire faculty, Doctor, Roth corrected. Just the most relevant members. Madame Beaumont, the elderly woman, stepped forward. Her accent was faintly French as she addressed Elena. Dr. Roth has made quite extraordinary claims about your playing, Mrs. Novak. Naturally, we are curious. I'm really not prepared to audition, Elena said, feeling cornered. This isn't an audition, Dr. Lin said kindly. Think of it as a private sharing among friends. Friends I just met, Elena muttered, but she was fighting a losing battle. With 5 pairs of eyes watching her expectantly, she finally sat at the piano. The Rachmaninoff, if you please, Dr. Roth said. Elena's hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. She glanced at Pavel, who gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, she began to play. The familiar opening chords of the Rachmaninoff concerto filled the room. Elena tried to focus solely on the music, to forget her audience, but her nerves made her fingers clumsy. She stumbled over passages. She had played smoothly just yesterday, her tempo uneven, her dynamics flat. After a particularly jarring mistake, she stopped abruptly. I'm sorry, I can't do this. You're too tense, Professor Winters said. You're thinking too much about what we might be thinking instead of focusing on the music. Try again, Doctor, Lynn suggested. But this time, close your eyes. Pretend we're not here. Better yet, Madame Beaumont said. Play something else. Something you feel comfortable with. Elena hesitated, then began a simpler piece, a Chopin nocturne she had taught herself years ago. As the gentle, flowing melody took shape, she felt herself relaxing slightly. By the time she finished, her hands were steady again. Much better. Madame Beaumont nodded. Now, back to the Rachmaninoff. For the next hour, the 4 visitors took turns offering suggestions, corrections, and occasionally praise. Dr. Lin focused on her hand position, showing her how to achieve more power with less strain. Professor Winters discussed the historical and emotional context of the piece. Dr. Roth made notes about which passages she might simplify for the performance. But it was Madame Beaumont who seemed to understand Elena best. While the others focused on technique and interpretation, the elderly professor simply observed, occasionally making small comments like, "Trust your instincts there," or "Remember to breathe with the phrase." By mid-morning, Elena's head was spinning with conflicting advice. Her initial resistance had given way to confusion and a growing sense of inadequacy. These people lived and breathed classical music at the highest level. What had made Dr. Roth think she could possibly perform at their celebration? I think that's enough for today, Madame Beaumont finally declared, rising from her seat. Mrs. Novak needs time to process. Dr. Roth looked disappointed. But we haven't decided. I have decided, Madame Beaumont said firmly. Mrs. Novak will play the Rachmaninoff at the Saturday evening concert. Elena's heart sank. Despite the vote of confidence, she felt more uncertain than ever. Madame Beaumont, I appreciate your faith in me, but I really don't think the problem, Mrs. Novak, Madame Beaumont interrupted, is that you are thinking too much. Music is not just about thought, it is about feeling, about connection. She tapped her chest. You have this connection naturally. Don't let these academics make you doubt it. Hey, Dr. Lin protested good-naturedly. Madame Beaumont waved a dismissive hand. You know I'm right, Henry. We've spent the morning trying to correct what doesn't need correction. Dr. Roth frowned. Elena's technique could certainly use refinement. For a career, yes, Madame Beaumont agreed. For a single performance, she has everything she needs already. What she played for me just now had more genuine musicality than half the technically perfect performances I've endured over my 50 years of teaching. Her words hung in the air, and Elena felt a small spark of something. Not quite confidence, but perhaps possibility. "We'll leave you to think it over," Dr. Roth said, gathering his things. "But we do need an answer by this evening." After they left, Elena collapsed onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. Pavel sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. "That was intense," he said after a moment. Elena gave a shaky laugh. "That's one word for it." "What are you thinking?" She sighed heavily. "I'm thinking they're all crazy, especially Madame Beaumont. Me, performing at Grantham. It's absurd." "Is it?" Pavel asked quietly. "Elena, I've been telling you for years that you have a gift. Now you have 4 expert opinions saying the same thing." 3, she corrected. Dr. Lin and Professor Winters clearly had reservations. "They were trying to help you improve, not discourage you," Pavel pointed out. "If they thought you were hopeless, they wouldn't have bothered." Elena rubbed her temples, feeling a headache forming. "Even if, and it's a big if, I could play adequately in a practice setting, performing on stage is completely different. I've never played for anyone but you, Pavel. The idea of sitting at a piano in front of hundreds of people makes me physically ill." "Stage fright is normal," Pavel said. "Everyone experiences it, even professionals." "This isn't stage fright," Elena insisted. "This is life fright. I'm a small-town librarian. I've never wanted the spotlight. I play piano for myself because it brings me joy. Why would I ruin that by turning it into a public performance?" Pavel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because some gifts are meant to be shared. Because music only truly lives when it connects performer and audience. Because you might discover a part of yourself you never knew existed." Elena looked at her husband, at his earnest expression, his bandaged hand, and felt a pang of guilt. He had been so excited about this performance, had worked so hard to prepare. Now it was being taken from him, and instead of being bitter, he was encouraging her to step into his spotlight. "I need some air," she said, standing abruptly. "I'm going for a walk." Outside, the October day was bright and cool, leaves crunching under Elena's feet as she walked aimlessly through their neighborhood. Her mind churned with conflicting thoughts and emotions. Part of her, a small, quiet part she rarely acknowledged, was thrilled by the possibility of performing. What would it feel like to play that magnificent piano in the Grantham Concert Hall? To interpret Rachmaninoff's passionate music for an audience who truly understood it? To step out of the shadows and be seen, really seen, for the first time? But the larger part of her was simply terrified. What if she froze? What if she made a horrible mistake? What if everyone realized she was an imposter, an amateur pretending to belong in their professional world? As she rounded the corner back toward home, Elena knew she had reached a crossroads. Whatever she decided would change things, either stepping into an entirely new and frightening experience, or retreating firmly back into the comfortable privacy of her musical life. The question was, which path would she regret more? That evening, Elena sat at the kitchen table across from Pavel, a cup of tea growing cold between her hands. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional rustle as Pavel shifted his injured hand to a more comfortable position. "I'm going to do it," Elena said finally, breaking the long silence. "I'm going to play at Grantham." Pavel's face lit up. "Really? You're sure?" Elena wasn't sure at all. In fact, she felt slightly ill just saying the words out loud. But during her walk, she had realized something important. She was more afraid of regret than she was of failure. "I may embarrass myself completely," she warned. "I might freeze up and forget everything. I might be the worst performer in the history of the Grantham anniversary celebration." "Or you might be extraordinary," Pavel countered, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Either way, I'm proud of you for trying." Elena called Dr. Roth that evening to give him her decision. His delighted response was both gratifying and terrifying. There was no backing out now. "Wonderful," he exclaimed. "We'll put you in the Saturday evening showcase just as we planned for Pavel. Can you come to the conservatory tomorrow? We should get you familiar with the piano in the concert hall." And so began the most intense 5 days of Elena's life. The next morning, Pavel drove her to Grantham, an hour away from their small town. The conservatory campus was smaller than Elena had imagined, just a cluster of elegant stone buildings surrounding a central courtyard. But walking through the heavy wooden doors of the main building, she felt the weight of its history and prestige. Framed photographs of famous alumni lined the walls, alongside concert posters announcing performances by renowned musicians from around the world. "Intimidated yet?" Pavel asked with a gentle smile, noting her wide eyes. "Completely," Elena admitted. Dr. Roth met them in the lobby and led them to the concert hall, a warm, wood-paneled room with excellent acoustics and seating for about 500 people. On the stage stood a magnificent Steinway grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the stage lights. "This is where you'll perform on Saturday," Dr. Roth said, gesturing toward the stage. "Why don't you try the piano? Get a feel for it." Elena approached the instrument cautiously, as if it might bite. She had never played on a concert grand before, only her family's upright and the baby grand in the community college practice rooms. This piano was in another category entirely. She sat at the bench, adjusting its height, and placed her hands on the keys. The action was responsive, almost eager under her fingers. She played a few exploratory notes, then a scale, marveling at the rich, balanced tone. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Play something," Dr. Roth encouraged. "Whatever you like." With Pavel and Dr. Roth watching from the front row, Elena began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as the magnificent instrument responded to her touch. She chose a piece she knew well, a Schubert impromptu, and lost herself in its flowing melody. When she finished, both men applauded. "That was lovely," Dr. Roth said. "Now let's hear where you are with the Rachmaninoff." For the next 2 hours, Elena worked through the concerto under Dr. Roth's guidance. He was a demanding teacher, stopping her frequently to suggest changes in phrasing or dynamics, but his manner was kind and patient. By the time they finished, Elena felt both exhausted and exhilarated. "You've made remarkable progress," Dr. Roth told her, "but we have a lot of work to do before Saturday. Can you come back tomorrow morning? I've arranged for Dr. Lin to work with you on technique, and Professor Winters wants to discuss interpretation." Elena nodded, though her stomach knotted at the thought of more scrutiny from the conservatory faculty. "I'll be here." The next 4 days fell into an intense pattern. Each morning, Elena would drive to Grantham. Pavel had insisted she take the car, despite the inconvenience to him, for several hours of work with various teachers. Dr. Lin focused on helping her develop more strength and clarity in difficult passages. Professor Winters shared insights about Rachmaninoff's intentions and the historical context of the piece. But it was Madame Beaumont, with her stern expression and rare warm smiles, who became Elena's most valued mentor. While the others emphasized technique and historical accuracy, Madame Beaumont seemed interested primarily in Elena's emotional connection to the music. "Forget about the notes for a moment," she instructed during their second session together. "Close your eyes. What does this music say to you? What story is it telling?" Elena hesitated. "It feels like longing, like reaching for something just beyond your grasp." Madame Beaumont nodded approvingly. "Yes. Rachmaninoff wrote this after a period of deep depression. It was his return to composition, his way back to himself. When you play, think of that journey, from darkness to light, from despair to hope." Under Madame Beaumont's guidance, Elena began to think of the concerto not as a series of difficult technical challenges, but as an emotional narrative. This approach transformed her playing, giving it a depth and coherence that impressed even the skeptical Dr. Lin. "Your progress is remarkable," he told her after their Thursday session. "If I hadn't known you were self-taught, I would have assumed you'd had years of training." "It's just for this one piece," Elena reminded him. "I'm not suddenly a concert pianist." Dr. Lin smiled. "Perhaps not, but you're certainly a musician." In the evenings, Elena would practice at home on their upright piano, with Pavel offering encouragement and occasional suggestions. Despite his injury, he remained deeply engaged in the process, listening critically and helping her work through challenging passages. "Use a bit more pedal there," he would say, "or try bringing out the middle voice in this section." On Friday afternoon, the day before the performance, Elena returned to Grantham for a dress rehearsal. She had chosen a simple black dress, nothing flashy but elegant enough for the occasion. As she walked onto the stage, she was surprised to find not just her teachers but a small audience of conservatory students scattered throughout the hall. "We thought you should have some practice playing for people," Dr. Roth explained. "Just a few students from the piano department." Elena's hands grew clammy at the sight of the attentive young faces. Until now, she had managed to focus on the music itself, pushing aside thoughts of the actual performance. But the presence of even this small audience brought her anxiety rushing back. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered to Madame Beaumont, who had come backstage to check on her. The elderly teacher took Elena's trembling hands in her own. "Of course you can. The music is in you now. Trust it to carry you through. But what if I make mistakes? What if I forget something?" "Then you will make mistakes. You will forget." Madame Beaumont shrugged, "and the world will continue to turn. The audience will still go home having heard beautiful music." "But no buts," Madame Beaumont said firmly. "Listen to me, Elena. Most performers are so concerned with technical perfection that they forget the true purpose of music, to move people, to touch their hearts. You have this gift naturally. Don't let fear rob you of it now." Elena took a deep breath and nodded. She walked onto the stage, her knees weak, and sat at the piano. Facing the scattered audience of students, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first few minutes were tense, her fingers stiff with nerves. But gradually, as the music flowed around her, Elena forgot about the watching eyes. She forgot about her lack of formal training, about the prestigious venue, about the important people who would be in tomorrow's audience. There was only Rachmaninoff's glorious music, speaking through her hands. When she finished, the small audience applauded enthusiastically. Several students approached the stage afterward, eager to meet her. "That was incredible," said a young woman with glasses. "Especially that cadenza in the development section. Your interpretation was so fresh." "I've been working on this piece for 2 years," admitted a serious-looking young man. "But I've never thought about the emotional arc the way you presented it." Their genuine admiration was both flattering and disconcerting. These were conservatory students, people who had dedicated their lives to music. How could they be impressed by her, an amateur who couldn't even read music fluently? "You see," Madame Beaumont said when the students had gone, "you reached them. Not because your playing was technically perfect, it wasn't, but because it was honest and heartfelt." Elena drove home that evening feeling cautiously optimistic. The dress rehearsal had gone better than she'd expected. Perhaps tomorrow wouldn't be a complete disaster after all. But that night, lying awake beside Pavel's sleeping form, doubt crept back in. What had she been thinking agreeing to this performance? She was going to make a fool of herself in front of hundreds of people, including some of the most respected musicians and teachers in the country. By morning, Elena's nerves were so frayed that she could barely eat breakfast. Pavel watched her push food around her plate with concern. "Maybe this was a mistake," he said. "If it's making you this anxious, you don't have to go through with it." Elena shook her head. "No, I need to do this, even if it's just to prove to myself that I can." She spent the morning practicing slowly, focusing on the sections that still gave her trouble. By early afternoon, it was time to get ready. She put on her black dress, applied a touch of makeup, and twisted her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. Pavel drove her to Grantham, his injured hand making the task awkward but manageable. Neither spoke much during the drive, both lost in their own thoughts. At the conservatory, Dr. Roth met them at the stage door. "There you are. We were getting worried." "Traffic," Pavel explained, though in truth they were only a few minutes late. "Well, you're here now," Dr. Roth said, ushering Elena inside. "The concert starts in an hour. You're second to last on the program, just before the faculty ensemble." He led them to a small green room where other performers were warming up or sitting quietly, focused on their upcoming performances. Elena took a seat in the corner, trying to calm her racing heart. Madame Beaumont appeared at her side, elegant in a long black dress with a single strand of pearls. "How are you feeling, my dear?" "Terrified," Elena admitted. The older woman nodded as if this were perfectly reasonable. "Use it. Channel that energy into your playing." She patted Elena's hand. "Remember what we discussed, the music is already in you. Just let it out." As the hour approached, Elena could hear the concert hall filling with people. Dr. Roth had mentioned that the anniversary celebration had sold out weeks ago. 500 people would be watching her. Tonight, the thought made her slightly dizzy. "I can't do this," she whispered to Pavel as they listened to the first performer, a violinist, through the backstage speakers. "What was I thinking?" Pavel squeezed her hand. "You can and you will. And no matter what happens out there, I'll be proud of you for trying." One by one, the performers left the green room and returned, some exhilarated, others disappointed with their showings. All too soon, it was time for the performer before Elena. She listened as a young cellist played a Bach suite, her mind racing with last-minute worries and fragments of Rachmaninoff. And then Dr. Roth was at her side, telling her it was time. "Break a leg," Pavel whispered, kissing her cheek. On shaky legs, Elena followed Dr. Roth to the stage door. Beyond it lay the concert hall, the magnificent piano, and 500 waiting faces. "Ready?" Dr. Roth asked. Elena wasn't ready. She might never be ready. But it was too late to turn back now. She nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out onto the stage. The lights of the concert hall seemed blindingly bright as Elena walked onto the stage. Applause greeted her, polite but reserved, the standard welcome for an unknown performer. Through the glare, she could make out hundreds of faces watching her with curious expressions. These weren't just casual music lovers. They were musicians, teachers, critics, people who could spot every technical flaw in her playing. Elena's mouth went dry as she approached the grand piano at center stage. She adjusted the bench, her movements feeling stiff and unnatural. When she sat and placed her hands on the keys, she was alarmed to discover they were trembling so badly she could hardly hold them. Steady, Dr. Roth had introduced her with a brief explanation about Pavel's injury and Elena stepping in as a last-minute replacement. She could almost feel the audience's skepticism. Who was this woman they'd never heard of? What qualifications did she have to perform such a demanding piece on this prestigious occasion? Elena closed her eyes, trying to gather herself. Remember what Madame Beaumont said, she thought. The music is in you. Just let it out. But when she opened her eyes and tried to begin, her fingers seemed to belong to someone else. They hovered uncertainly over the keys, refusing to strike the opening chords. Seconds ticked by. The silence in the hall grew heavy, uncomfortable. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. Panic rose in Elena's chest. She couldn't do this. It had been madness to think she could perform here in this place among these people. She was about to stand up to flee the stage in humiliation when she caught sight of Pavel in the front row. His eyes held nothing but warmth and belief. Next to him sat Madame Beaumont, her posture straight, her expression serene. The elderly teacher gave Elena the smallest of nods as if to say, "I know you can do this." Elena took a deep breath and closed her eyes again. Instead of thinking about the audience, about her lack of training, about all the ways she might fail, she thought about the music itself, the story it told, the emotions it conveyed. She thought about Rachmaninoff writing it after a period of debilitating depression, pouring his journey back to himself into these notes, and then, without consciously deciding to begin, her fingers found the keys and the opening chords of the concerto filled the hall. The first few minutes were tense. Elena played carefully, focusing on accuracy, her body rigid with concentration. But gradually, as the music flowed around her, something shifted. The notes on the page, which she had studied so diligently over the past week, began to fade from her consciousness. Instead, she found herself playing from a deeper place, following the emotional thread of the music rather than just its technical blueprint. By the time she reached the lyrical second theme, Elena had almost forgotten where she was. The audience, the prestigious venue, the critics all receded into the background. There was only the music speaking through her hands, telling its story of struggle, longing, and ultimate triumph. She wasn't aware of her body swaying with the music, of the expressions moving across her face as she played. She didn't realize that her unorthodox approach, simplifying some technically, demanding passages while emphasizing the emotional, Narrative was creating something unique and compelling. All she knew was the music itself, flowing through her like a river, carrying her along in its current. When Elena reached the powerful climax of the movement, her playing had transformed completely. Gone was the careful, tentative approach of the beginning. Now she played with passionate intensity, her whole being engaged in bringing the music to life. The magnificent Steinway responded to her touch, filling the hall with rich, resonant sound. And then, almost too soon, she arrived at the final chords. As the last notes faded into silence, Elena slowly opened her eyes, returning to reality as if waking from a dream. For a moment, the hall remained utterly quiet. Elena sat frozen at the piano, suddenly aware again of the hundreds of people watching her. Had she made a complete fool of herself? Had her amateur status been painfully obvious to these sophisticated listeners? Then, from somewhere in the back of the hall, someone began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound growing, building, until the entire audience was on its feet. The applause thundered through the concert hall, accompanied by cheers and cries of bravo. Elena stared out at the standing ovation in disbelief. Surely this wasn't for her, but there was Pavel in the front row, tears streaming down his face as he applauded with his good hand. Beside him, Madame Beaumont was smiling broadly, nodding as if to say, "I told you so." Elena rose shakily from the piano bench and managed a small bow. The applause continued, showing no signs of diminishing. She bowed again, then again, overwhelmed by the response. When she finally left the stage, her legs barely carrying her, Dr. Roth was waiting in the wings. "Extraordinary," he said, his eyes shining. "Absolutely extraordinary." In the green room, Pavel enveloped her in a careful hug, mindful of his injured hand. "I've never heard it played like that," he whispered. "Not even by professionals. You made it your own." Before Elena could respond, the room began filling with people. Other performers, faculty members, audience members who had somehow found their way backstage. All wanted to meet her, to congratulate her, to express their amazement at her performance. "Your interpretation of the development section was fascinating," said an older man who introduced himself as the music critic for a major newspaper. "So different from the standard approach, yet somehow truer to the spirit of the piece." "Where did you study?" asked an elegant woman in an expensive suit. When Elena explained that she was self-taught, the woman's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Remarkable. Simply remarkable." Dr. Lin pushed through the crowd to shake her hand. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I underestimated you. Your technique may be unconventional, but your musicality is undeniable." Professor Winters was more analytical in his praise. "The way you handled the counterpoint in the middle section, simplified but emotionally transparent. It made me hear familiar passages in a completely new way." Elena accepted their compliments in a daze, still unable to believe what had happened. Had she really just received a standing ovation at Grantham Conservatory? Had she really moved these sophisticated, knowledgeable listeners with her playing? Madame Beaumont appeared at her side, taking her arm protectively. "Enough," she announced to the crowded room. "Mrs. Novak needs some air. You can all continue your adulation tomorrow." With surprising authority for someone of her small stature, Madame Beaumont guided Elena through the throng and out a side door to a small garden beside the concert hall. The October night was cool and clear, stars visible above the campus buildings. "Breathe," Madame Beaumont instructed, and Elena realized she had indeed been holding her breath. "Did that really happen?" Elena asked, her voice small in the darkness. Madame Beaumont chuckled. "Indeed it did. You conquered Grantham with nothing but honesty and heart." She patted Elena's hand. "Just as I knew you would. But my playing, it wasn't technically correct. I simplified parts, I changed things, and that's precisely why it was so powerful," Madame Beaumont interrupted. "Any number of conservatory graduates can play that piece with technical accuracy. But how many can make an audience feel what you made them feel tonight?" They sat in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the continuing concert floating through the garden. Then Madame Beaumont said, "What will you do now?" "Do?" Elena repeated, confused. "With your music," the older woman clarified. "After a debut like this, you'll have options. People will want to hear you play again." The thought hadn't even occurred to Elena. She had been so focused on getting through this one performance that she hadn't considered what might come after. "I don't know," she said honestly. I never imagined anything beyond tonight. Madame Beaumont nodded thoughtfully. Well, there's no rush to decide. But if you're interested, I would be willing to work with you. Not to change your approach, heaven forbid, but to give you the technical foundation to support your natural musicality. Before Elena could respond, the garden door opened and Pavel appeared, his face still alight with pride and excitement. There you are, he said, joining them on the bench. Dr. Roth is looking everywhere for you. He wants to introduce you to the board of directors. Elena groaned. More people? I think I've met half the musical world already tonight. Pavel laughed. Get used to it. You're a star now. Hardly, Elena protested. I'm still just a librarian who plays piano in her spare time. You were that this morning, Madame Beaumont said. Tonight you're an artist who happened to work in a library. There's a difference. The three of them returned to the concert hall, where Elena was indeed introduced to the Conservatory's board of directors, a group of distinguished men and women who seemed genuinely impressed by her performance. The board chair, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, pulled her aside for a private conversation. Dr. Roth tells me you've had no formal training, she said. Elena nodded, expecting the usual expression of surprise. Instead, the woman continued, We have a special program at Grantham, the Community Artist Fellowship. It provides part-time study opportunities for exceptional musicians who have taken non-traditional paths. Would you be interested in learning more about it? By the time Elena and Pavel left the conservatory that night, her head was spinning with possibilities that had never before seemed within reach. Madame Beaumont had offered private lessons. Dr. Roth had men. Potential performance opportunities at future conservatory events. The board chair had given her information about the fellowship program, which would allow her to study part-time while maintaining her job at the library. It's a lot to take in, Pavel said as they drove home through the quiet night. How are you feeling? Elena gazed out the car window at the passing streetlights, considering the question. Overwhelmed, she admitted. Confused, excited, terrified, all of the above. Pavel smiled. That sounds about right. I never wanted this, you know, Elena said softly. To perform. To be noticed. I was happy playing just for myself. I know, Pavel replied. But maybe this isn't just about what you want. Maybe it's about what you have to give. They drove in companionable silence for a while. Then Elena said, Whatever happens next, whether I take any of these opportunities or not, I'm glad I did this. I'm glad I didn't let fear stop me. So am I, Pavel said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. So am I. When they arrived home, it was well past midnight. The house was dark and quiet, just as they had left it. But as Elena hung up her coat and kicked off her uncomfortable dress shoes, she felt as though she was returning to a different life than the one she had left that morning. She walked into the living room and stood looking at their family piano, the worn upright that had been her private sanctuary for so many years. Gently, she lifted the fallboard and played a few quiet notes, smiling at the familiar sound. No, it wasn't the magnificent Steinway she had played tonight, but it was here, on this humble instrument, that she had first discovered the joy of making music. It was here that she had taught herself to play, following nothing but her own ear and instinct. It was here that she had developed the natural, unorthodox approach that had, ironically, captivated the sophisticated audience at Grantham. Whatever path she chose now, whether to pursue formal study, to perform again, or simply to continue playing privately, Elena knew one thing for certain. The music would always be a part of her life. Not just as a listener, not just as the wife of a music professor, but as someone who had found her own unique voice at the piano, and that perhaps was the most unexpected gift of all.